Which way is this way?
It's 11:30. So I am Ahmari. I'm going to introduce the Ahmari team in a second. But our presentation today is going to be on trauma intervention for Black girls and gender nonconforming youth. The subtitle of our presentation is Preparing the Mind to Learn, because we know that we think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example. We can't learn and we can't reach self-actualization and all of these things if we don't have that basis of feeling safe and feeling supported in our community. So basically what we need to do is employ these trauma interventions to be able to actually prepare our students' minds to learn. And we're going to kind of talk about all the things that have happened over the past several years that are making it more and more difficult for our students to come into school prepared to learn and prepared to engage with each other. And their teachers. So that is a separate. So for our icebreaker, I just wanted to give everyone a chance to go around and share their names and then who your favorite teacher was growing up and why. So I can start. Like I said, my name is Ahmari, and my favorite teacher growing up was my librarian. My elementary school and middle school librarians were both sisters, but I like the middle school one a little bit better. There was a time in particular where I had to, I really wanted to read this book. It was called Learn. You may be familiar with the movie. And I was so desperate to read it because I saw high schoolers reading it, but I was in 6th grade. And she really tried to talk me out of reading it because it had a lot of mature material. And she had a very real conversation with me about like what was in the book and why it might not be the best for me because I was a really sensitive kid, but I insisted I knew it was best for me. So she gave me the book, she ordered it from high school. And then when I came back in like a week later, I was devastated. She spent a lot of time with me, just talking to me about like how I felt about my decision, what I feel like I learned, and she pointed me towards other resources to kind of help me understand the truth that was in that book and like manage what I had exposed myself to. But I always really respected her for like allowing me my autonomy in that moment and like allowing me to say, no, I know what's good for me, even though she knew it was better. And she supported me through that decision, even when I was hurt. So that's why she's my favorite teacher growing up. And I'll pass it around this way.
I'm Fraser O'Leary. I'm the Ward 4 representative on the State Board of Education. I taught in the DC schools for almost 50 years. I'm still teaching. I didn't have a favorite teacher when I was going there, because I was a really bad student, and I was a disruptive student. I realized after my fifth child was born, and she was diagnosed with ADD, that I was ADD, still am. And that probably had a lot to do with being disruptive in the class. I was a class clown. I wasn't bad disruptive, except I got put out of class. Probably that had to do with my going to college and flunking out of college and going to Vietnam and going back from Vietnam and got out of the Army. And then I had my high school on it by then, and I went to American University and I walked into a survey course of English literature, and it changed my life. I met a professor, a merit bachelor, who taught, I took 7 classes from him in college, and started teaching English right after I graduated from college. So he was my favorite teacher. I guess that was growing up. You probably talking about, you know, a child, and I was 24 years old at this point.
Yes.
My name is Suzette Francis. My favorite teacher was my third grade teacher. Her name was Miss John. When I was a child, I was just really shy, extremely shy. I mean, I just really didn't know people. But Mrs. Young intuited what I needed, and she would put me in positions where I had to help other students. Because I was a good student, she would have me help others, and I really liked that. I really liked being a teacher, and like you, I loved reading books. I just loved it. So I would say Mrs. Young, she was just such a intuitive, wonderful, nurturing, safe teacher.
Can I ask a question? Did you ever get a chance to talk with them?
No, I didn't.
Can I make a suggestion if she's still alive?
She's
Oh.
I knew her daughter and her
Oh,
daughter
you
told
could write a
me
letter
her
to her
mother.
daughter.
Maybe I could do this.
For me as a teacher forever, that's the most, that's the best stuff you can get from these people. Say, you think something to me.
Yes, you are so right. Thank you for that.
Hi, I'm Brianna, and my favorite teacher, so my favorite teacher, used to be reading circles. She read all the Harry Potter, like straight through, so there's just any work that so, and all of her sons and daughters.
So we are Marines and our favorite teacher. Hi everyone, my name is Sylvia, and my favorite teacher growing up, her name was Mrs. Lewis. She was my second grade teacher, and part of the reason why I really loved being in her class was because she made a really big effort to include my mom in like trips and things like that. And she didn't speak Spanish, and my mom didn't speak English, but I remember there still being like a connection. And even though I served as like translator at, the age of like 8, I didn't mind it, because it felt so nice to be able to have my mom there for like trips and things like that.
So your mom felt safe too.
Yeah. And now that I'm a teacher, I'm like, wow, that is how you do family engagement,
So we're doing name and your favorite teacher growing up.
Okay, my name is Chantel Cornigan. One of my favorite teachers, her name was Mrs. Connor. I went to school in Anne Arundel County. In the high school I went to, there weren't too many African-American teachers. And she happened to be an African-American female science teacher. And I thought that science was not my thing, although I loved science. But she had a way of conveying the information, and she brought in people who looked like me to, whether it was pictures, at that time it was videos, and we had VCR with a TV connected, but pictures, videos, and that was the first time I saw people who look like me in the science arena, right? In middle school, we talked about mostly European scientists, and they were all males. And so to have someone who thought of me enough, and all of her students enough, I mean, we talked about Spanish science, it was just, wow. It took me to get to high school to have someone to kind of look at me and people who look like me and people who didn't look like me to say it's important to bring about diversity in this arena where and that was my first African American science teacher. So I said to myself, I'm gonna go and major in science, biology, and I'm gonna teach it. And another thing that I loved about her, she was strict. So there was no lowering the standard, try to be a child's friend. It was, this is the standard, you're gonna meet me here. And I remember thinking how my students say about me, she doesn't like me. And she's always, coming after me. But what I realized is her way of teaching, pedagogy, her belief in understanding me as an individual child, what has made me who I am today. She's no longer with us, because of course, through social media, I was like, I gotta find her, I gotta tell her what I'm doing, she's gonna be proud. And this question came up in one of our PDs, and I'm getting ready to get emotional, so please excuse me. So I just wish, I know she sees all of us, all of the students, but there were 10 of us, engineers, one is a doctor. So she doesn't really, I knew she knew what she was doing, but to hear it from us, the thank you, we're unable to do that right now. I mean, we can say it, if you're spiritual, you can say it, go to an atmosphere all you want, but to have her physically sitting next to me, I wish I had that. And we all, everybody's all over the world, but if we had an opportunity to just talk about it. We get an opportunity yearly, every now and again, but it was just so phenomenal. Now, as a 40-something-year-old woman, I think about even my students, right? How I could possibly influence them. So I wish, I could put this on a video, because I don't even know where her family is, because they moved out of Anne Arundel County and whatever, but through social media, I don't even know how to get in contact with anyone, just to let them know what your mother or auntie or cousin did for us. So that's the story that I would like to keep sharing with people, because it makes a difference. It makes a difference. It really does. Like every time I'm like, oh Lord, why they have that question up on here? Because it's too early to be emotional for me. But okay, and so I just, hopefully we all in this room think about that opportunity that's presented to us as educators, because it makes a difference. It does, truly.
Yeah, we'll go to the back really quickly, and then we're gonna jump into the presentation. So just share your name and your favorite teacher growing up.
My name's Ebony Kirkland. I teach at Blue Light School. My favorite teacher, surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, but he was a red curly haired Jewish man. And he was a tutor because I was in a hospital for 2 years getting chemo and radiation treatment when I was a kid. And so when I came home, he was my tutor, and he was just very into me and me getting back to where I needed to be. And he took me places like the museum, and he was just so attentive and so caring, so loving. So he'll always be one of my favorite teachers.
So mine is I'm gonna have you guys introduce yourself and say your favorite teacher on the next slide. But so what we wanted to start with today is kind of giving context as to who we are and how we kind of come to understand the things that we're going to present through research and evidence-based things, obviously, but also through a lot of anecdotal experience. So our team is from Monument Academy Public Charter School. We are a boarding middle school, 5A boarding middle school. in Northeast. And so our mission is to empower students, particularly those who've experienced significant adversity, including involvement or risk of involvement in child welfare and or other social service systems, with the requisite academic, social, emotional, and life skills to be successful in college, career, and community. In addition, we aim to create an outstanding school that attracts, supports, and maintains exceptional and caring people. So I just really wanted to underscore how our mission is to support some of the most marginalized students in DC, which is how they come to understand these things about Black girls and gender non-conforming youth. As well as the fact that we really have a staff wellness component built into our mission. So what we're kind of aiming to do is build a holistic, healthy community for everyone in our school, including our teachers, as well as the other teams that we're gonna dive into, and our students, and of course, our families. So, one new team, we just want to go through and say names.
Sure. So I'm Danielle Nelson. I serve as our Chief of Wellbeing at Monument Academy, where I oversee our clinical services and our staff wellness initiatives. And my favorite teacher was my 9th grade teacher, Miss Monica Jones. And I'm still in touch with her, thank goodness. But she was just one of those teachers that went above and beyond. Junior high school for me was really tough, just a lot of changes in my family, and just coming into my own identity, prepared for high school, college, unhealthy relationships, healthy relationships. And she served as a great mentor to me. She would take us out to trips throughout DC. She really exposed her youth and her English class to many things related to the literature we were reading. And she was just a phenomenal Black woman. And when I got to be an adult and in my career, I was able to honor her at Crossview High School at a PD, where we were honoring teachers. And I got to really just lay out how she impacted my life and my cohort of students. And we just remain friends now because we're colleagues in the work. And I just appreciate her. And she really got the imprint on my life. And I really aspired to be like her and just connect with young people the way she did. So I just honor Ms. Monica Jones today. Thank you guys.
Max Maurice, and I'm the other social worker at Ahmari Academy. My favorite teacher when I was growing up was Mr. Les Welling. He was my first psychology teacher. And Mr. Welling stood out for me just for one, I like psychology. And then secondly, he addressed all of us in his class by our last names. I was Mr. Maurice. His rationale was, if I could be Mr. Welling, you could be Mr. Maurice. And I always appreciated that. Just probably why I call most of the students by their last names to this day, as well as it's probably the easiest name to remember most of my students, because I can't remember most of their first names anyway. And I think that, it's kind of funny because I think of, the state of the country now where, like, if you ask some of the people who are having all this pushback with educational pieces, like who their favorite teacher was and how that impacted their lives. And it seems like you're taking that away from students now. It's like, with all the, you can't teach this, so this is not, pertinent. And it just seems really, and I can't tell Mr. Welling because he's deceased now. Yeah, he's deceased. So he was my favorite teacher.
My name is Olivia. I'm a clinical social work intern at Monument Academy. And my favorite teacher growing up, I had a lot of favorite teachers, but was probably my first grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Knox. And she was my favorite because I feel like when I was growing up, I was really hyperactive a lot of the time. And I didn't like to listen to teachers. I was more of a challenging student, I would say. And so I think in a lot of sports and classrooms, I was always the right, pushing back. And she was very patient with me. She was patient with my mom. And she was just really cute. That's why I was I really appreciate her.
Okay. So at Monument, we have a couple of critical pieces of our model that really help us develop that well-being atmosphere that I was telling you about. So obviously we have our well-being team. Half of our well-being team is here today. And then we have our SAFE team, which Mr. Maurice is on, which does a lot of our family engagement and does pretty much all of that inside of the work in terms of doing home visits and things like that we'll get into. We have a daily advisory program, so again, since the students work and they wake up every morning, they have advisory first. And those advisory programs kind of rotate through the different teams. They get to interface with everyone at least once throughout the week. So we have wellbeing advisory that focuses on teaching our dialectical behavioral therapy model to the entire school. So that's kind of a really critical school-wide intervention that we have. So every Monday, the kids wake up and know they're going to have a DBT lesson. And so we use DBT Skills A, which is DBT Skills for Adolescents. And basically we use that because it's a very wide-reaching model that allows students with all different types of problems to be able to have coping skills to deal with whatever they're facing academically as well as emotionally and in their home. And DBT skills start with mindfulness but end with interpersonal skills, which is really, really important because we want to be able to teach our students not just to regulate their emotions or to tolerate distress, which are some of our two other main modules. We also want to teach them to be in community better with others. That's how we create a community that is healthy and everybody's communicating well. So that's a big piece of our model. We also have our core behavior team, which kind of undergirds those same things, but is able to do a lot more pushing into our classroom to be able to support the students in acting those things on a daily basis moment to moment. It's also really important to note at Monument that almost like 3/4 of our population is considered at risk to different extents. And we have roughly 50% of our population are SPED students. The majority of our students being categorized as level 3 and 4. So we're working with students who need a lot of academic and emotional support. So we've been able to try a lot of different things over the past couple of years and learn a lot from our model. We also are really lucky to have small class sizes, which can really structure like what we do in terms of interventions. But some of the things that we include in this presentation are going to be a little bit better fitting for larger class sizes. Or we also wanted to integrate interventions that are good for all different types of teachers. So that's something that we're going to talk about as we get into the presentation. But first, the most important thing that we kind of need to define before we get into this presentation is the term push out. Because the term push out is something that you're going to hear about a lot when you start to research how Black girls and gender nonconforming people are affected by the current education system. So the term push out was coined by Dr. Monique Morris in this book. It's called Push Out, The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. She has a series now, so there's 3 of these. This book kind of outlines what the issue itself is, and then there are 2 books after this that kind of outline lots of different solutions and how to integrate students into creating those solutions in the school. So we're going to try to cover all of that content in this presentation and also give you guys a chance to so to define push out itself, the central argument of the book is that typically Black girls are being criminalized and physically and mentally harmed by beliefs, policies, and actions that degrade and marginalize both their learning and their humanity, leading to conditions that push them out of schools. By first understanding what their criminalization looks like and how common it is for that struggling Black girls. We can all get behind fair and effective education strategy that provides quality education for every young person. So essentially what she argues in this book is that the way that we conceptualize school as a pipeline now, the conversations we have on things are largely based off of the experiences of Black boys. And that's because what we understand about mass incarceration over the past 50 years is also largely based off of the experiences of Black and brown men. So at the turn of the century, as more women started to be incarcerated and the carceral system started to kind of reach into families and affect families and youth in more and more far-reaching ways, more researchers like Dr. Morris have been understanding how there are unique pathways to criminalization for women, for Black girls, and for Black gender nonconforming and trans folks. And so that's what we're going to kind of talk about in this presentation. But I think that one of the really, really good ways that she describes why this is harmful is that, one, it masculinizes the experiences of Black girls. So we start to continue to perpetuate those stereotypes of Black girls being aggressive, of Black girls acting like men and boys, when in reality, some of the behaviors that are manifesting are a direct cause of being harmed and being traumatized, right? So what we're seeing is actually defense mechanisms, but we're perpetuating the narrative that these are girls acting male, if that makes sense. And another really important thing that she outlines in the book is that continuing to perpetuate the current narratives about the school to prison pipeline, they don't encompass all the unique pathways that Black girls and trans kids can take into the system, encourages a kind of myopia that leaves everyone without a proper understanding of school relationships and the other factors that push Black girls in the system to incarceration. So one really good kind of concept to get familiar with when we're talking about push out is the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. That's something that's been researched a lot, particularly in DC, and on girls and trans kids in this area. And so that's something that we'll talk about a little bit later as to how different types of harm that Black boys might not be exposed to as much can manifest in ways that get Black girls the same end result, which is ending up criminalized. And that doesn't always have to mean being incarcerated directly. That can mean being pushed out of schools, that can mean being pushed into other systems. And so that's why I also wanted to kind of really highlight what we do at Monument, because we're trying to catch kids kind of from all different types of social service systems. And that's the most common outcome for Black girls, is they might not be put in jail, but they might be put in a foster care system, or they might be, referred out to a mental health service for an issue that they don't actually have. But that's how people read their behaviors, and so that's what they're diagnosed with, and we'll get into that in just a second. I also, before we get into that, wanted to really highlight what we're facing in schools today. So I know this is a little bit of an old statistic, but I think it's still a really important one. So in 2017, almost 1/3 of PCPS students were chronically absent, and of all Black students, nearly 1/4 of those students were chronically absent. So we know that if we want to support students in schools, well, it's really important to support students in schools because that's the place where most youth spend most of their time, right? But if we want to support students in schools and give them this space of well-being, we have to actually have them in school. And I think this statistic also kind of makes us wonder, like, why are so many Black students absent? And so that's where we get to push out, right? Is that students don't show up to school not because they're lazy, home environment, or the school environment is not supporting them because they're basic enough, and so they don't come or they can't come. And that's something that's really important for us to kind of start to understand how push out isn't necessarily, again, the way that we understand a school to prison pipeline is suspensions and expulsions, right? But that's not normally what it looks like for Black girls. It looks like not coming to school for months and months at a time and nobody coming to check in as to why that's going on. Or it looks like not coming to school for months and months at a time because that girl has to take care of siblings, that girl has to work, that girl has to do lots of different things to support her family. And because we as a school system, as a community, aren't supporting her needs, school is the lower priority, which means that she can't come. And it doesn't mean she's not committed to learning, it doesn't mean she's not capable of learning, it just means that we need to think of more expansive ways to make the school system supportive of what our girls are going through. Of course, we have to touch on, all of the youth violence that's been going on in DC, whether that's gun violence, fighting, all of those things, as well as relationship issues. So since we work at middle school, any sexual behavior to us is hypersexual because it's not developmentally appropriate, right? So when we see kids coming in 6th grade, starting to explore things that they shouldn't even be aware of, it starts to raise red flags. And Push Out talks a lot about how hypersexualized behavior or sexualized behavior in girls is punished instead of inquired about. Why are you in 6th grade, watching porn on the school iPad? Who exposed you to that? Who taught you those things? And instead of asking why we were doing these things, we automatically kind of take the punitive or the blaming approach instead of really thinking about the harm that is underlying in those type of behaviors. So also when we think about violence, very similar concerns, right? Like, how did you get access to a gun at 13 or 14? Why do you feel like you need to carry a gun at 13 or 14? Why are you getting into so many fights? Is it because you don't feel safe? Is it because you have conflict that has not been resolved? There's all types of questions that we can be asking, but instead we take a punitive approach, and that leads students to not come to us with their problems. They don't want to tell us they have conflict with someone because they know that, oh, well, if you guys get into it, you're going to get suspended. And they don't come to us to ask us to help them resolve the conflict, or walk them home after school, or do any of those things that we could do to support them, right? And then of course, and I want to say with this bullet, we don't have a lot of research about this, and we don't have a lot of research about absenteeism after the pandemic, obviously, because it's all very recent in the culture. But what we do have research about now is the huge youth mental health crisis is going on nationally, as well as increased educator burnout. So what that kind of tells us is that overall, we don't feel well. No one who's coming to school feels well after the things that have been happening for the past 3 years. And so we kind of have to restructure what we can do to support each other. But we want to do that retroactively, looking at the problems that we had and the ways that we failed certain students that we know were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So there's a lot of things that we don't have answers to. We look at research, but we do have a lot of anecdotal experience. And that's something that I really want you guys to take away from this presentation, is knowing that your experiences and the expertise you have from your own life, your teachers that you've experienced that impacted you so much, your experiences as teachers are things that we can utilize while we're still trying to figure out things on the research side, and utilize those things to kind of help us make interventions that we know will work. So, what we're going to talk about right now really quickly is behaviors and how they might show up on the surface versus what is underlying that we need to address. So, on this iceberg, this one talks about behaviors in class, and it talks about how what we usually notice as adults, we attribute to willfulness, but we also usually attribute to morality, right? So we have a student who has late work, they're procrastinating, they have low grades, they're not motivated. We think, oh, this student is lazy. Oh, this is a bad student. This is a student who doesn't care about their education. But we know 9 times out of 10, there's something going on underneath the surface. It's actually impacting their executive function. So it's not a question of why do they, it's a question of why do they, and how can we address what it's the need, right? So it can be ADHD. It can be a speech and language issue. It could be autism that wasn't detected and we haven't been addressing it early enough. It could be bullying issues. It could be low self-esteem. Maybe there's something going on in the classroom on the peer level that makes a student unsafe and makes them feel unsafe and unable to engage. Maybe it's just a lack of sense of security. I know that something that we notice a lot is we have students who are always coming in sleepy, students always coming in hungry, and they don't get their work done. Students who are always asking for a snack. I mean, it's really, really hard to get your work done when your stomach is growling and you can't think straight, when you have that little hunger headache in the back of your head. And so, sometimes we have rules about not eating in class, but if the student is hungry and hasn't eaten, do we want to enforce that rule, or do we want to support them and put them in a place where they're prepared to learn? Is it trauma, which 9 times out of 10, especially with what we've been through over the past 3 years, it is. It's just figuring out what the trauma is and what we can do to reinstill that sense of safety with the student. So there's all types of different things that it could be. And some of these things are things that we're going to need to test for, we're going to need to screen for, we're going to need to get them evaluated. Other things we can determine just through simple conversations and through building better relationships with our students. And that's something that's going to be really important, as we're coming out of the pandemic, is being able to rebuild relationships and teach students how to just maintain communication and connection a lot better, because all of that was kind of severed or negatively affected by the pandemic. Then we also have this behavior iceberg that talks about all the behaviors that you're going to see in class, things that make, again, a bad student. But really, there's an internal emotional state that is manifesting those behaviors, and we need to figure out what that is in order to change the behavior. So, addressing the screaming, addressing the crying, addressing the always being frustrated, always coming in with an attitude, the loss of self-control, or just being threatening, hostile to other students or to staff, that's being caused by something, and we have to figure out what that is. And so it can be all of these different types of emotional states, and we'll show some more on the next slide, but some of these, again, are things that can be fixed with a simple conversation. The students can feel rejected because of something another classmate said. They can feel rejected because of something you said a couple of months ago. You might not even remember, but it made them feel like, oh, this teacher doesn't like me, this teacher doesn't support me, this teacher, isn't on my side. And so that's something that we need to be able to identify. But these are things that students will feel more comfortable naming, and they'll be more capable naming as we build relationships with them and teach them how to really dig into what exactly they're feeling and what exactly they're experiencing. But again, we can't find those things out unless we're connected to each other and are able to build those relationships. So this anger iceberg, I know you guys are gonna get sick icebergs, so there's 4 of them now, but this is one of my favorites because it talks about all of the levels of what can manifest as behavior, and also kind of like this idea of a particular behavior breaking off of the larger issue of what's going on. So again, what we're seeing on the surface is the student stress responses, their coping strategies, whatever they've learned as to how to deal with their problems, right? And 9 times out of 10, it's anger, aggression. Those are the things to be criminalized in the classroom, right? Those are the things to respond most quickly to because of how they make us feel, right? And that's what usually gets a label or diagnosis, particularly that anger, that aggression is the thing that's going to be identified first, and that's going to be like, you need to get out of this classroom, you need to get evaluated, what is the problem with you? And usually those things are labeled as mood disorders, or they're labeled as, this is just a difficult student, this is just a bad girl, this is just someone who I don't want to have in my class. Then again, we have that unspeakable, that unacknowledged. So that's kind of similar to what we saw on the last slide. That's the nuances of what's actually causing the emotional distress and all the different layers of the distress itself. But really what's at the root of it is this unmet need for safety, or an inability to self-regulate, or difficulty with attachment. That's what's underlying what you might see on the surface, which is anger or aggression or just complete disengagement. Then we go underneath that, what caused that unmet need for safety? What caused that inability to regulate? And 9 times out of 10, that's trauma, abuse, or adversity, right? So those are all the things that our students are experiencing in their homes, with their peers, or in their community. And we know with Black girls that this is something that they're going to experience at a disproportionate rate, but they're not going to report it nearly as much as any other population. And they're not going to have as much peer support to go through those things as other demographic groups would. And then of course, we have current historical and generational trauma. So these are systems of dominance, this is the violence, the poverty, it's racism, it's patriarchy, it's all of those things. It's war, like it's feeling unsafe in your community, and when you see a bunch of other kids your age get shot, feels like you're living in a place that is at war. And so that's like the midnight level. And so what we kind of need to think about is what we're seeing up here is just the slightest little bit. I think the most important way that I could describe it is that all of our students are experiencing this, right? Every kid in DC right now is experiencing this to different extents. Post-pandemic, all of them are experiencing this as well. We can safely say that. And everyone has this, but there's only a small subset of students that are actually going to show us this. There's only a small subset of students who are going to show us the anger. Some of them might withdraw, some of them might be sad. And this is the one that we respond to the most quickly, but all of those students need help and need someone to dive down deep with them and address what they're experiencing. And sometimes that doesn't lead to a label or a diagnosis. Sometimes it just leads to working through it, because we also know that the things down here are not going to be solved overnight. They might not even be solved in the lifetime of us or our students, but there are things that we have to honor to understand why they show up in the classroom the way that they do, and still try to get them to feel the things that you were feeling when you were talking about your teacher, right? That if I could just tell this person how much they impacted me, how much they were able to direct my life, that's still capable. We're still capable of doing that with students, but we need to address all these things down here first. And so I wanted to use this one particular iceberg that talks about ADHD to kind of exemplify how these behaviors and emotions can be read differently depending on who you are, right? So what most people think ADHD is the trouble focusing, the fidgeting, all of those things. But research that's been forthcoming has actually shown how ADHD manifests differently in Black girls and women, which is why they're diagnosed less and diagnosed at later times than other kids are. So the normal time to kind of be diagnosed with ADHD is late elementary school, early middle school, right? But there are a lot of Black women who are not getting diagnosed until they're in college. So that's affecting their educational experience all the way through. It's affecting their college experience, and that's usually when things kind of come to a head, is when they're struggling so much in college and they can't figure out why, and they try everything else and then figure out that it's finally ADHD. But with some of these symptoms, we can see why they might have been misdiagnosed, or they might have been kind of swept along in the system. So the ones that I kind of want to highlight for this are problem focusing on things even if they're of interest, trouble regulating emotions, all or nothing, sleeping problems. So when we see these type of behaviors in a Black girl, we're automatically going to think 9 times out of 10 mood disorder, right? She's depressed, or maybe if there's the trouble focusing, the fidgeting, the hyperfixations, we might think that they have DMDD, right? They always have to be bipolar, especially with the mood swings. But it could actually just be ADHD. It's not typical, however, that when these symptoms start to show up, that someone, asks a Black girl or a Black gender non-conforming young person to start thinking about ADHD and start asking those questions that you would normally ask anyone else with ADHD. And then also when we think about this midnight level of the iceberg, when we see chronic unemployment or trouble recalling commonly used words, we're like, chronic unemployment for a Black woman, that's not anything too far out of the norm, right? But it could be. And we don't necessarily think that these things are red flags when we're looking at this particular population. So it's something to just kind of think about, keep in mind. I think another one to point out is forgetting to eat, sleep, or go to the bathroom. We might take that as a sign of neglect, right? When we see a young Black girl have that, it's like, oh, you're being neglected, or someone wasn't raising you to eat on time, have a good sleeping schedule, go to the bathroom. But everything might actually be going perfectly fine at home, and it might be something going on with the student that we need to inquire into further, and it could be ADHD. But it's not something that is always going to be our first assumption when we see a Black girl. And so that's something to think about, is like when we're talking about identifying early and being able to get to addressing some of these issues, we always want our perspective to be very broad and know that like everything shows up differently in everyone, the same way that everyone is going to deal with trauma, abuse, and adversity differently. We talk about how people are going to show us different tips of their iceberg. We want to remember that the tips of the iceberg are not always what we expect and don't show up the same way every single time. Does that all make sense? So I'm going to get to the interactive part in a second. This is my last slide before you guys get a chance to practice. So some of the interventions that we use in Monument to address all of the different types of trauma, adversity, special education needs, with our staff as well as with our students. We have a well-being newsletter that goes out every single month with evidence-based strategies and practices for our teachers and our staff members. And so sometimes in our newsletter we highlight particular things like ADHD or ODD, but recently we had a student pass, so we talked about grief and how to cope with that as a community and how we can integrate different activities in to different classrooms to cope with that, and what grief might look like in different students based off of their age, or based off of their gender, based off of their proximity to the student. So that's something that we employ so that all staff members can feel like they're equipped to deal with whatever they're facing and feel like they can kind of have a better idea of what exactly to look for. Then, of course, we do the home visits. So that's just going in and talking to our parents, talking to our students, seeing them in the environment they always are in, and being able to gain that extra context of where certain behaviors might come from, what they have learned, especially in our environment with the boarding school. Home visits are really, really helpful to kind of give us context to some of the behaviors that we might see in the boarding environment. But it's something, of course, that can just be really, really helpful as an opportunity to connect with the family, and to be able to feel like we're building school community and not like a school community at school, and we send the students home back into the community, if that makes sense. Ideally, the school community is a part of the community, it's one and the same. So home visits are a really good way of integrating that. Then we're talking about the school-wide DBT curriculum, but another thing that we do is our diary card program. So after every DBT lesson, we have the students send us a diary card via Google Docs, and they basically write about their day or about their week and whether or not they use the DBT skill. A lot of them forget to do that, but the information that we get in there about their day, they've been dealing with, are really helpful to guide us to know, okay, this student might be having a bad day for X, Y, and Z reason. They might be having a rough week. They might be feeling this internally, and that's why we're seeing these behaviors. So it's a fun way, and I've seen a lot of teachers do this anonymously for students who just send it at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, how they're feeling. And it's a good way to kind of get everyone involved, to get everyone talking, and for you to get a lay of the land when you're trying to figure out what's going on with students. But of course, interventions can look like lots of different things. So some of the things we want to suggest are mindful journaling practices and mindfulness movements. So there's a lot of research about how mindfulness is really, really good for all ages and how you can try a lot of different tactics to integrate it into classrooms or integrate it into school communities. Movement breaks are really, really good for students who do have ADHD, but for younger students, it's something that we use a lot. There's like little YouTube videos that give them like a fun, movement to do, like a little mini dance, things like that. Or for more reserved students, a mindful journaling practice is also a really good time to allow them to connect with themselves and whatever they're dealing with, to put it onto that page or do their little movement activity and give them a second to work through their emotions so that we can regroup pretty quickly in class. So it's something that you can use like on a daily basis, like in class at any point in time. Also sensory activities for overwhelmed or very active students. Things like having a little bucket of those fuzzy cotton balls that you get from the craft store. Or our kids love sand. Like we have a little bucket of sand that people come in and run their hands through all the time. Having some plants around, things like that, just something again to ground them, for them to touch. And these are really good interventions for students with ADHD, but they can also work for students who are dealing with emotional issues as well. Because we know that sometimes getting students out of their mind into their body can help them cope and get better. Counting backwards from 100 by 7 to regulate emotional students. It sounds very weird, but it's not exactly right brain, left brain, because that's not a perfect science, but being able to activate the section of our mind that does math and does like analytical things actually like takes a lot of brain power away from our emotional side. So getting students to count and do random small math problems is actually a really, really good way to get someone to calm down their emotions. And to get someone who might be feeling really sad when they come in the morning, someone just has their head on their desk and they're, oh my God, I don't want to talk. Like asking them to do just this for you, you can see a small difference in them. And it actually is able to distance them a little bit emotionally from the situation so they can better talk about it afterwards if they want to. But if not, it's just a good way to kind of distract the mind and redirect so that you can get back to learning. Circle time and debrief time at the end of the day is a great way to kind of do something similar to the diary card program, but really also this is a good intervention because it allows them to connect with each other and for, again, building that school community, being able to make students feel as though they can talk to their teachers, they can be honest with them, they can be honest with other students. You'd be surprised, like, the things that come out when we just allow 10 students to randomly come into the office at the end of the day and talk about their day. We've seen students hash out fights in front of us. We've seen students tell us things that we didn't even know were going on. So just allowing that space for gathering and for community is a really, really good way to cultivate holistic communal well-being. And then, of course, overall, what we want to do with any intervention is to be able to address the deficits while still building upon the strengths. So everyone's school and everyone's student has their own unique strengths. And so that's something that you always want to keep in mind whenever you are building an intervention for each classroom stage or whatever particular student you're trying to work with, is kind of remembering to build up the things that they're good at. Because a lot of times, some of us have a complicated relationship with school. and it can make us feel inferior. It can make us feel like we aren't the best student, or we weren't the most successful during our time there. And so we always want students to feel like when we're working on all of these things at once, they don't feel overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, I'm failing math class and now I have to deal with my emotions about my mom. Oh, I'm like, failing English and I have to deal with everything that's going on in my neighborhood right now. We want them to be able to feel like they're building towards a goal that they can see, and one that makes them feel stronger and more. So we are going to practice. I think we have a couple of minutes left, right?
Yes. I'm just gonna quickly announce that when you guys are done, you let out, end of the hallway, turn left there, and on the right there's the kitchen. Lunch is all out. We have like 20 minutes until the next session. Awesome.
So we are going to practice. So we're going to break everyone up into these 3 groups. And we're going to give you an example student from the book. And we want you guys to just consider as many of these questions as you have time for. We'll give you maybe 10 minutes to work on it. So the questions are, what are some ways this student's experience and trauma may manifest in the classroom? How can you work to create a safe space for this student? How might you go about building a relationship with them? What might you need as a teacher to support them? And what other resources can you tap into? And then what feelings, experiences, or memories might this student trigger in you? And how would you go about addressing it? So we're going to give you all examples from the book. We're going to come around. So I'm going to take like this group right here, and then, oh, there's 4 right here for week 5. So yeah, we'll just do this side and this side. We'll give you guys an example from the book in about 10 minutes, and then we will close out with takeaways, and we have a brief list for you guys at your end. So I'll start with timer and.
Is there a way we can email you, like, I have some questions about some information, about the content you just shared, as far as what your school is doing. So I would like to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, we're gonna do a contact list at the end.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So what are the groups again?
It's just gonna be this side and this side.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna group with only 2 people.
That you know.
What are you doing?
Good to see you. Good to see you. Nice of you.
It's just like a really
I'll do that.
good technology sometimes. I have an idea.
Olivia is gonna share instructions with us. Okay, so the example that you guys have in the book is a girl named Diamond. She's in high school and she's been joining the school.
So this one is
because she's been spending time with her adult
And
boyfriend and her adult boyfriend. Diamond doesn't really acknowledge it, but
so she
you
says my
understand
school is
her adult
predominantly
boyfriend
white.
has been
She
kind of
said,
encouraging
okay,
her to
after
get
math
success first, and so
school,
Diamond has been doing that
on
to get money to help support
It's
herself.
funny. When I get the question her mother and goes, she's slow. What's wrong? I get
So
so angry.
we're
Number one, because I already showed them I'm bad at math. Number 2, because I'm not slow. I don't call me slow at all. I take my education seriously. Do not call me slow. That's why I'm at school till late, and that's your reason. It does not only make me want to fight them, it makes me want to ask them why would they say something like that. The fact that I'm on
And
the
it's so funny.
females finish, but during our
So, I would
having your
say
perspective
how
of behind it.
answer the questions that are related to Shaw's
Don't
story.
have no
Really triggered me or obviously.
I think that I would want to have a conversation with Dominic.
It's either kind of goes into
Well,
generation, and not just on that, her being
see, because I don't have the context of the kind of student she is.
they are intergenerational.
And she's missing class because she's doing sexual.
Yes, and she's not coming to school.
Understand, is what I'm trying to get black students
How
to
old is she?
understand.
She's a
The people who are
high school
doing it
student.
hard, they're also harming
Middle
themselves, because they're
So
becoming
she's
that
not of
person
age.
who does that. So
To me, that's a mandated report.
give them some armor
Parent
of understanding. That's what
Yeah, I think, there's those steps that are built in, like the systematized steps of what
Okay, so maybe
reporting.
I think
It's
the
approach
girls,
from the social worker, and kind of like incentive needs. I think it's
think
if I try to think about it from the
like,
lens of like,
more
what
as
are
far
the
as
classroom teachers doing this importance,
where
right?
that kind of.
I think, creating that environment where she feels like
And I know,
the relationships that she has
say
with the
things like
school
on the
are
side,
like strong on the moral level,
and
some of the more influential members that she has. Boyfriend, the greatest thing possible, there's probably somebody,
and just like.
my
take
experience is
like
there's
that
usually someone in the school who has
child
that avenue with.
to the side and say like that will not be tolerated in this classroom, to kind of just create like that.
Someone else.
Safety and
environment.
So it goes
My
with that
wondering,
because it happens.
I don't know if school wants this, this is where it's going to job,
In a black and white
right? Like,
situation,
so she feels like she's empowered and has an opportunity to earn finances and support her. Like,
and they get to
if that's like something that's.
like that journal on each other. I'm like, no, we're not doing that.
Some sense of
We're not doing
her
that.
own empowerment.
And so
Yeah,
it's not
but
to
the
the point
reason
where
she's
the
in this
person's white, but the rest of them just look like.
he's offering her.
So it's just, like,
She's
building a culture, like, we're not gonna tolerate that. If this is what you do, we're just gonna,
more dependent on.
we're gonna go
she
against
is
the
on
law.
So for me, there's a reason why.
You know, in my class, I always
And
emphasize
see security in this world.
roles,
Right? That especially security that she didn't have.
when we do some credit seminars or discussions, you
Love.
always have an unfortunate student who is an observer, who at the end will talk about what they see, or you can have things get shared, where you can have two wants to talk, wants the observer, then she switch. And you can always have them talk about
She doesn't
what did you feel as you were discussing. And then bring that up,
That's,
you know, and they'll talk about those
so
feelings
when
and
real
emotions.
man develops a
I
relationship
know we
with a
have to have
child,
SCL
and the child assumes that that's
and
okay.
sometimes
Then I'm
just
looking at it
saying
saying,
this is a safe space,
or is it
you know, how you feel is
pseudo
important
relationship,
and
right?
what you say matters.
Now I can leave home.
So I think
can
assigning
take care of myself,
roles
even though I'm
is
putting my
important
body
in
in
your classroom.
whatever.
When
Now
you
it's
have sufficient
making her
involved
involved
in
in
sexual
sexual
maybe a little bit of.
and there's money for
Because
that.
they want their
She's
voice
not
heard too, they matter too.
That something is
And
wrong.
it's always important.
Because all I
to
see
let
is
them know
independency and
if
love,
you're
and being able to take care of myself.
She doesn't see, she can't be alone.
1 minute left, guys.
There's no way in the world. She thinks he loves her. She thinks that's all her.
Yeah.
Or how would you?
I could only,
go about
I mean, I've worked with a student like that before. We both did. And she just kept saying, she's like, coach, gotta do this. You know, this money is the key for me and my siblings. And trying to sit there and explain to her.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is. And to me, that is the misconception. We're looking at a child that's adult. But this child now has adult feelings and adult thoughts. Right? And she's processing it as a, thinking she's processing it as she's,
What happened?
she continued to do what she was doing. And because I stopped working at that school, I don't know where she was. I did run into her one summer school at Roosevelt. And she was still doing the same thing. But she felt as though she.
You said this is what was considered to be a
Because the administration works to teach to buy
sometimes,
things
we
that.
know we don't have addresses, we have to be like, look, we're gonna tell you that stuff, I need you to
That's
take
that's
it. The child will get mad.
Yeah.
10 minutes, so I can get this.
That it takes
The
outside
rest
of the
of the
school.
school.
It's, and so that's what I want to ask. What are they doing
And I had this
for
frustration
household,
with
right?
me,
They do a lot of services in the school.
and,
But this school has a board of
students are
That's something that's school.
And so, and he works at,
all
Mr.
right,
Murray's.
but you know, your whole disposition has changed. It's
I would like
not
to know, Mr. Murray's, how much, how many, or what level of resources do you provide for the whole thing?
May I see
Because your kids go home on the weekend. Yeah, so what is it? So you provide counseling, family needs?
Okay, I think we're gonna come back. Ahmari, are you ready? Yeah, so we have two things we want to share with you guys as takeaways before we let you go to lunch. So if you scan this QR code here, you can complete the ACEs survey and learn more about its meaning. There's a really good article at NPR about students, what it means for adults. And of course, we administer the ACEs survey to all of our students. It really helps us understand what some of the common underlying traumas are, especially ones that are going to affect their ability to engage with others, form healthy attachments, all of those things. And also there's some violence that's being highlighted by the ACEs survey. So take your time when you take it. It's not something to take casually, like you might need to do it at home when you're by yourself. But it is a really, really helpful tool to start understanding how trauma might manifest, or what particular type of trauma might manifest, and how it can manifest into health issues, mental health issues, physical health issues, social challenges, all of those things. And then I'm going to say short trauma. So all of this work was kind of put together by our trauma informed book club that we have for staff. And so these are some of the titles that we next month. And then also this is a really, really good resource to talk particularly about Black girls, youth, and talk about different community organizations that are doing this work right now. There are several of these things, and they have a map that shows organizations all across the country. There's a lot in DC here in Virginia, but this is a common reading list. I would also really recommend this one. This one is called Neurodiversity. And it has 10 different conditions in the book and talks about the strengths of those conditions as opposed to the common stereotypes of those conditions and what you can do to support young people or adults who have those conditions. So they go over mood disorders, they go over attention disorders, they go over autism, they go over developmental disorders, all of those things. So I really recommend this one and also the Body Keeping Score. That one is a really good one to kind of describe how trauma manifests in our bodies and in relationships. Then we have Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. This one is particularly about the experiences of Black women and how trauma shows up differently in us versus other folks. And then Lessons in Liberation is a really good toolkit you can find anywhere online that basically talks about how we can start to put more liberatory and just communicative practices into our classrooms. So these are all really good resources if you're interested, and we'll be staying around if you get in contact with us or if you need more about what was said, the resources, anything like that. We'll be here right now. So thank you guys so much.